war should always be an absolute last option. And he didn't exhaust that. Instead, he supported attacking them in the middle of the negotiations. That is dishonorable. It is unethical, and it's bad leadership. And he's backed Israel his entire time in their destruction of Gaza, and he's failed to stop the war in Ukraine. No, I think every president in my lifetime has been a war criminal. That's right.
Okay, so every president in your lifetime has been a war criminal. Impeach Donald Trump beneath the prison.
It's part of being a world empire, yeah.
Dave Smith just schooled Steven Crowder on Trump's extensive pro-war record, and in this clip, Crowder still seems to argue that Trump is somehow a peace president. He's much more peaceful than we'd give him credit for, but Dave actually throws Trump's record directly in Steven Crowder's face. So let's watch it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
So many of Donald Trump's most important, and there's really never been a moment in my lifetime like that before. There's really never been, I can't think of any time where George W. Bush did something and Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly were just like, that's it. We're done supporting him. And Obama never lost Rachel Maddow or something like that. And I think the fact that so many of us stood up against that was, in terms of, like, to your point, in terms of the real world, what can we actually do? I think that was the most effective thing that we could do at that point, was just to make it very clear that if you do get us into another catastrophic war here, you're going to lose a huge portion of your support. This is the only incentive that politicians respond to. Okay. Now, in terms of your point about me saying
I address that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So, and I know that you and I think we both share a fundamental hatred of mischaracterizations. Hopefully, you don't think that I've done that here. I've asked these questions fairly. I think that's a mischaracterization, and I think it was at large of Donald Trump from you. I think to say that he should be impeached based on a betrayal, when we probably don't have a president with a more clear track record on any issue than Donald Trump on Iran. If I said Israel, I meant to say Iran, where he said they can't get nukes. That famous escalator ride down, immediately said, and if I'm president, Iran won't get nukes. And before that, on X, saying Iran cannot get a nuke, 60 days talking, negotiating. They weren't playing ball. Time is up. You can disagree with it. But to suggest that that's a betrayal, I would say that's the exact opposite. People maybe need to do the research on the candidate who they're supporting, in your case, endorsing, electing. He was very consistent about that.
Okay, so he did say those sorts of things, but that's why the United States had negotiations with Iran to create a new JCPOA to Trump's liking, such that there'd be a new inspections regime that didn't call for war. In fact, Trump was very critical of Biden for launching direct military strikes against Iranian targets in Syria and Iraq, and for bombing Yemen, both of which are things he did, except for he took it a step further by bombing Iran itself at the behest of Israel, by the way, shelving our negotiations. And when he's talking about those negotiations, a 60-day timetable being up, actually that timetable was extended, and they were set to have more negotiations the day that the United States bombed Iran, or the day before. It was very close in that proximity of time where this was supposed to be the case. So by saying they can't get a nuke doesn't mean that he was going to bomb Iran. He would have never said that on the campaign trail, trying to, be this peace candidate, present him as that, himself as that, even though we know that's not true.
No, I disagree completely. And I think that Donald Trump also bragged about not getting us in any new wars, and bragged about ending wars, and many of which he didn't end. But no, I mean, look, there's a major difference between just saying Iran won't get nukes, which could mean anything, and saying I will launch a war against Iran if they enrich up to 60% and are still willing to negotiate down the enrichment. I'm sorry, those are just very different things.
Well, you called for his impeachment before he launched the strike, and we're not at war. But Dave, you've been talking. Hold on a second.
Man.
You always do this where you say, let me finish a sentence, but then you address a point and then scattershot 5 different points. You called for this before.
I'm on the exact point that you just asked me about, Stephen. You're claiming I'm filibustering. You're interrupting every time I speak.
No, I'm not, Dave. I want to address that one point, and then we'll go back. We're not at war. You called for his impeachment before the strike. I do think if you're talking about, what other option outside of diplomacy, because you said there are many other options, it could mean anything. Donald Trump, again, in context, if you look at the context, said it was a huge failure, Barack Obama's policy on Iran. He said that you cannot set red lines that you do not enforce, and I will enforce my red lines. Donald Trump was very clear. He set a red line, 60 days are up, so we've tried the diplomacy. Well, what other mechanisms are in place to prevent it?
Okay, he said it was a failure because it was at the behest of the Israeli regime that hated the JCPOA because it took the prospect of regime change off the table. That's the truth there, and Dave is exactly right. This is far different than saying you're going to launch a war, like the point I just made earlier about the fact that Iran can't have a nuke. Well, his base actually was promoting him on the basis that he wasn't calling for a war in Iran on the campaign trail. And yeah, Dave thought that he was impeach worthy before that, and that's because he launched missile strikes that weren't authorized by Congress against Yemen, exacerbating that war to a degree that it hadn't really been. Biden did that too, by the way. Biden deserves, a lot of disdain for that, a lot of criticism for that. He deserves to be impeached too. So does every other president in my lifetime. This is a world empire that doesn't really follow the guidelines that they're supposed to in the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. You can't just go willy-nilly bombing countries. I guess you can if you're a modern president, but you're not supposed to. So this is a completely illegitimate war-making campaign, not only by Trump, but by previous presidents. And it seems like people like Crowder are willing to condemn previous presidents for that happen to have the wrong letter attached to their name, but not Trump when he does that exact same thing.
Yeah, okay, well, I don't think, again, if you're saying that enriching up to 60% was the big problem, then the JCPOA wasn't a failure. They weren't enriching anywhere near to that level until Donald Trump tore up the agreement, or walked away, pulled America out of the agreement. And yes, he arbitrarily set a timeline of 60 days, but there were meetings scheduled for the next day or 2 days later after when Israel first struck them and Donald Trump walked away. So the alternative was obviously to keep negotiating. Look, Iran was there to negotiate down the 60% enrichment. They had been down to 3 to 5% when America was good standing members of the JCPOA. The obvious alternative would have been to keep negotiating.
So you believe that it's a more effective form of world leadership in an impeachable offense to set a date, a timeline, say last call. I've counted to 3, count to 3, and then say I didn't mean it?
No, I'm saying.
But that would be what he would do effectively, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's silly.
Well, he already did that not only in terms of war, but also his tariff policy. He does that all the time. That's why, the liberal establishment drew up that mantra that he's taco. Trump always chickens out, right? He does it time and time again. But in this case, you have the conservative base defending it because it was bombing another country on the basis that they have a secret nuclear weapons program that Tulsi Gabbard just a few weeks prior to this said they didn't have on the behest of a client state of Israel that seems to wield more influence over our government than our government over Israel draws us into. That's when you're going to say that, hey, he would have looked horrible if he would have backed out of this, but then defend his tariff negotiation strategy with having countless deadline after deadline after deadline, real ID, deadline after deadline after deadline, delaying that requirement at the TSA. This happens in so many governmental policies. This is just dishonest. This was an illegitimate war launched at the behest of an imperial-like regime, the criminal United States, which it always happens. It's not just Trump again, but Trump deserves to be impeached for it, just like every other president. I'm with Dave on it.
For a president to do that.
Right. But that's not what I said. But you think what you said is silly. Okay. But what I'm saying...
No, he did say, we're 60 days up. Was Iran negotiating? Did Iran come to the negotiating table? Did Iran allow inspections?
Just finish whenever you want to, and then I'll try to...
I asked you that. Were the 60 days up? Did Donald Trump count to 3?
Yeah.
So he should continue negotiating after he sets a red line.
Yeah, well, he would. Well, no, Stephen. It's a little bit more. It's a little bit more than 1 cent.
Okay.
It's a little bit more than 1 centimeter deep. Okay.
Please enlighten me as shallow as I am.
Dude, it's like you just.
I know. Go ahead.
No, just a lot of people told me that, watch out, he's going to be constantly interrupting you, but I didn't realize it was actually going to be like this. Okay, so Donald Trump, what happened was Donald Trump had signaled at the beginning of the negotiations that he would be open to some enrichment, but that he wanted it to be brought down. And then Mark Levin and all of the hawks, they insisted that you put in the poison pill of absolutely no enrichment of uranium whatsoever. And he went along with that. And Iran was like, yeah, and then he set the 60 days. Now, look, I think it was a bad move to ever put that poison pill in and to ever set those 60 days. But yes, at that point, once you've done that, diplomacy in this case was obviously preferable to force.
Absolutely, and Iran doesn't stand as a threat to the United States. Dave is absolutely right about this. The diplomatic party negotiating this, headed by Steve Witkoff, went so abruptly from this idea that, hey, Iran has a nuclear enrichment program because they have a nuclear power program. Basically all, quasi-advanced countries in the world have that. So of course they can have that. But then suddenly and abruptly they shifted to no nuclear enrichment whatsoever. That is a poison pill. That couldn't have been acceptable to the Iranian regime. And I think as soon as they said that, we had known that Israel and the United States had collaborated to decide to bomb Iran. That's exactly what happened. It was preempted before this 60 days. So that is where this went haywire, and it's because of the neocons like Shapiro and Levin, who always wanted regime change in Iran. So did Netanyahu. He still wants regime change and war in Iran. He still raises that propaganda how they're seconds away from acquiring a nuke, and Boston or New York City might be nuked. He said that in a recent interview with Ben Shapiro, by the way.
And I think, in fact, probably we are in a more likely position now that Iran breaks out and tries to get a nuclear weapon than we were if he had continued the negotiations. But certainly, you exhaust the negotiations. You try diplomacy as much as you can. War should always be an absolute last option. And he didn't exhaust that. Instead, he supported attacking them in the middle of the negotiations. That is dishonorable. It is unethical, and it's bad leadership.
Totally agree with him. If I'm an Iranian national, a nationalist, talking to government officials in Iran, I'm saying, hey, we need a nuke now. This, more than anything else in our history, says we need a nuke. We need to become the new North Korea because regime change isn't on the table from the United States against North Korea anymore. Why? They have a nuke. Well, look at what happened to Gaddafi by comparison. He gave up his infantile nuclear weapons program in the mid-2000s. Bush had this grand speech about how Libya's rejoined the free world and everything like that. And yeah, the U.S. led his ousting through a, UN-led U.S., spearheaded war against him and his regime. And I'm not even going to say how he died. It was particularly gruesome. I don't know if the Ayatollah wants that, by the way.
Yeah, I don't think it's dishonorable. I don't think it's unethical, and I don't think it's bad leadership. I think it would be bad leadership to allow a country to completely flagrantly disregard their own agreements, to not honor their word, to have international oversight committees that you cite, Dave, as the gold standard, saying, yeah, they're only a few weeks away from this kind of dangerous uranium enrichment, and then to say, let's continue diplomacy. So here's my question to you. Because you said impeach, you said war crimes, and it sounds to me like there's no president in our lifetime who you wouldn't bury beneath the prison for war crimes. Can you name one?
No, I think every president in my lifetime has been a war criminal. That's right.
Okay, so every president in your lifetime has been a war criminal. Impeach Donald Trump beneath the prison.
It's part of being a world empire. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, based. I'm totally with him. He's exactly right about that. And Crowder's wrong about saying, hey, they were weeks away. That was the propaganda that Tulsi Gabbard put on Twitter just a day before the United States struck. And she didn't specify where it came from, maybe Mossad, but even Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't willing to say that they were weeks away, because in an interview with him after Israel launched these strikes, he said they might be a year away. So Tulsi Gabbard delivered her annual threat summary earlier this year. I think it was 8 or 10 weeks earlier than the United States joined in this bombing campaign. And she said not only do they not have a nuke, there's no evidence that they restarted their nuclear weapons program at all. But then you're getting this propaganda. It came from the neocons. Tulsi was compromised in some way, whatever you think about her. I don't think she's as vile and wretched, nearly so, as people like Marco Rubio and John Ratcliffe that wanted this regime change the whole time. But at the same time, it seems like she was compromised and the neocons went out. The neocons always went out in this administration, it seems. For the most part, they didn't get the full regime change and U.S. boots on the ground that they wanted, but they got their war.
I don't think Donald Trump is a neocon. As a matter of fact, I think he's the least neocon of all the presidents that we've had. We might just have a disagreement on that, but I definitely think
he's a neocon.
Well, you said your gripe was with neocons and your criticism of Donald Trump. I have criticisms of Donald Trump. H-1Bs, big one. I went in hard on that, for crying out loud. When you talk about the Epstein debacle, unveiling that, Pam Bondi shouldn't have a job. The Chinese student foreign visas, right? I think that's a big problem. I criticize him on a regular basis, calling for impeachment and buried beneath the prison when this man has ended more wars than any other president, at least that I can recall. Pretty close. He's ended many wars. The only
no U.S. wars that we're bankrolling, though. None of the big kahunas like Ukraine or Yemen, or, U.S. presence in Syria, or maybe stopping bankrolling the criminal Israeli regime. Not any of those, but hey, Azerbaijan's civil war. He ended that war. Well, that's great. I'm glad about that. I'm actually pretty happy about that. But that's not the same as ending a U.S. war that you're involved with, that the neocons want you to continue endlessly.
The one that he hasn't ended is Ukraine.
Which ones did he end?
We're talking about conflicts right now. I mean, for 12-day war is done. If you want to, because you've attributed that to Donald Trump and Israel. I mean, we now have a ceasefire before.
He started that war, which still continues. There's a ceasefire, and there's still war propaganda to get it going from Netanyahu's side. I hope it doesn't continue, and the American people are left just clinging to hope that if it's not Trump, that the next president won't just resume that war. And I think it might be resumed on the part of the United States with weapons, equipment, and intelligence from the U.S. going to that again. I don't know if that really counts. He started a war.
Or that we had the Abraham Accords. I mean, if you look at the invasions that have taken place.
None of those ended a war. The Abraham Accords didn't end any wars.
So if we're looking at the other examples in the past where you look.
He did answer that because it's true. I don't think he might know what the Abraham Accords are, actually, in this case. I'm glad he's criticized Trump on those other things, by the way. But I just think he's being dishonest in this point of trying to rattle off facts and hope that Dave doesn't know what he's talking about, but he does know what he's talking about in this arena.
Look at invasions from Russia when they got froggy. Obviously, they tend to favor Democrat administrations. I think he's been very non-interventionist, not an isolationist. And I think that Thailand, Cambodia is one that comes to mind. India, Pakistan. None of those count. Israel, Gaza, India, Pakistan.
No, it's not that none of them count, Stephen. It's just
Azerbaijan, Armenia. I know that because I have a lot of Armenian friends. I mean, you keep interrupting me. Do none of these count?
I don't think any of them are wars that Donald Trump was conducting that he ended. I mean, Donald Trump, look, in his first 4 years, he inherited the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. We had troops in Syria. We had troops in Somalia. He talked about pulling them out. And in fact, I think he was the major reporting about him being lied to about the number of troops in Syria, but he never did get them out. He kept the war going in Afghanistan for 4 years, surged it, even though he knew it was an unwinnable war. I will give him credit, he eventually wrote the plans that did get out, but it was for his second term. And then, of course, he left it to Joe Biden to completely fumble the entire thing. There. He kept the war in the Saudi invasion of Yemen going his entire first 4 years. He just broke records for the most strikes in Somalia in any year. We've been bombing them since 2002, I think. I mean, so I don't know. And he's backed Israel his entire time in their destruction of Gaza, and he's failed to stop the war in Ukraine. So, like, again, his rhetoric is certainly better. And there are a few things I could look to that I would point to, go, hey, he did a really good job there. But I don't know. I don't really agree with your overall characterization.
Totally agree with Dave. He's absolutely right here. The rhetoric from Trump on war and foreign policy in general has always been better. There's been no real problems with the rhetoric for the most part. Some of it's been wild and absurd, but most of the time his rhetoric is better on foreign policy and war than his predecessors. But that's exactly what it is. It's rhetoric. It's not action. It's not policies. We have remarkably similar war-making policies, and I'm so glad that Dave brought up some of the lesser-known facts about ramping up the bombing in Somalia this year. The heroic journalist Dave DeCamp over at antiwar.com has talked about that and covered that story when virtually no one else will. The strikes in Somalia are essentially off the charts. They're record-breaking this year, and you never hear about it. Trump, as Dave suggested, kept the war against Yemen going, kept the U.S. blockade on behalf of the Saudis going, and used one of his only presidential vetoes to keep that going. Exacerbated the war in Syria. He put boots on the ground, I believe, for the first time there officially, if there weren't special forces. That happened early in his presidency. Ramped up bombings in Afghanistan. He's right about laying the foundations for there to be a withdrawal from there, but, left it to Biden to bungle, right? Not having that during his presidency. He could have. We still have 1,000 troops in Iraq. The, war against Russia, which some people call a proxy war, it really is as close to a direct war against a nuclear power as we're going to get without being so. And, who knows when that's going to escalate even further than it is. Maybe Russia will launch a new offensive because it's so clear in their eyes that Trump's not willing to do what it takes to end this thing, and that's to declare through law, through international agreements, that Ukraine won't be part of NATO, that it will demilitarize, that you'll take the NATO assets out, and you'll denazify Ukraine. That's what Russia wants, and guess what? They're in the driver's seat, so you can say we're going to win back every inch of the 20% of the territory of Ukraine that Russia occupies. But, you know, it's just a pipe dream. It seems more utopian than anything you could possibly imagine now, when Russia controls, something like 20% of Ukraine, something like 85% of the Donbass, the majority of 4 Donbass provinces. And we're not going to end that. Why? Because the military-industrial complex benefits too much. So yeah, Trump's rhetoric on this has been good sometimes, but not when he's propagandizing to support the strikes like he did in Iran, floating the prospect of regime change on the table one night, saying, hey, if Iran doesn't make itself great again, why not have a regime change? That's straight out of the neocon playbook. How can people say that this isn't, at the very least, tarnished and tainted by neocon ideas, neocon themes, and neocon propaganda campaigns? Because it absolutely is. And when you stuff your cabinet with Ratcliffe and Huckabee and Marco Rubio, that's exactly what you're going to get, by the way, in Israel First Administration, not in America First Administration. But what do you think? Do you think Dave Smith was right about this? Do you think that he won this debate? What's the truth about Trump's record on war? Should he be impeached? I think so, but he shouldn't be impeached for specious reasons like Russiagate, but actually violating the Constitution, as he and all of his predecessors had. I'd love to have it retroactively applied to all presidents in my lifetime for being war criminals, violating Article 1, Section 8, and what it says about the requirements of declaring war. It belongs in the hands of Congress, not the president. That's why the founders drew up a document that doesn't give the American president the power of, at that point, the English king, that could generally wage wars unilaterally. They'd have to have Parliament fund it, but they could wage wars unilaterally. That's what we're supposed to have. We don't. We have an imperial presidency, and it's not unique to Trump. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Dave Smith. Thanks, Dave, for debating Steven. I think there were a lot of interruptions, but I love to hear this anyways. If you like this video, also consider becoming a YouTube member of mine by clicking the join button below. You can get access that way to all of my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And if you want a free copy of my book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. You'll go to that site, plug in your email. I'll email it right to you free of charge. No charge at all. It tells the story of how the United States went from a decentralized League of States to a centralized world empire to the detriment of real American patriots. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.